Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome, everyone, to today's explainer. If you've ever looked closely at a flower and just kind of marveled at how perfectly designed it seems, well, you're literally looking at millions of years of biological architecture at work. And today, we're going to unpack the completely fascinating rules behind that exact architecture. What we're looking at here is a really comprehensive biological blueprint. It details exactly how, and more importantly, why flowers take the specific shapes they do. We're going to reverse engineer this whole thing step by step. We'll break down all these colorful diagrams and that tricky terminology so you can read a flower's design exactly like a pro botanist. So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. 1. Decoding floral symmetry. 2. The 3 types of symmetry. 3. The actual benefits of that symmetry. And 4. My absolute favorite part, a rapid-fire quiz at the end to test your knowledge. All right, section 1, decoding floral symmetry, where we'll be defining our core terms. According to our source material, symmetry in this context basically just means the balance in the parts of a flower. You can think of it as this incredibly harmonious arrangement of petals, sepals, and reproductive organs all orbiting around a central axis. It's essentially nature's way of creating structural equilibrium. And to actually measure that balance, we use something called a plane of symmetry. This is simply an imaginary plane that divides the flower. Imagine, if you will, holding a remarkably thin, totally invisible sheet of glass and sliding it directly through the absolute center of a flower to create two perfect, identical halves. That invisible line, that's your plane of symmetry. And as we're about to see, how many of those planes a flower has literally changes everything. Moving right along to section 2, the 3 types of symmetry, or the biological designs. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how nature uses 3 completely distinct architectural strategies. Let's contrast the first 2 primary types side by side, because this is super important. On the left, we have actinomorphic, which is also known as radial symmetry. These flowers can be divided into equal halves in any number of planes passing straight through the center. Think of it exactly like cutting a perfectly round pie, right? No matter where you slice it across the middle, you always get 2 mirrored halves. Now on the right, we have zygomorphic, or bilateral symmetry. These guys can be divided into equal halves in only one specific plane. So instead of a pie, think of a human face. You can really only draw one vertical line right down the bridge of the nose to get a mirrored left and right side. Let's ground this with some actual real-world examples from our guide. For actinomorphic, remember that's that radial pie-like symmetry. We've got the China rose, the datura, the mustard plant, and of course the classic sunflower. If you picture a sunflower in your head right now, you can so clearly see that beautiful circular balance just radiating outward from the center. In stark contrast, our zygomorphic or bilateral examples include the pea, the bean, and the cassia flower, which happens to be a monocot. If you've ever looked really closely at a pea flower, you'll notice it has a super distinct top and bottom, plus these side petals that sort of fold around a keel. It's got a much more restricted, highly specialized, single plane design. But hey, nature absolutely loves to break its own rules, which brings us to our third category, asymmetric. These flowers are simply irregular. They cannot be divided into 2 equal halves by any plane. Honestly, no matter how you try to slice it, it just won't work. The prime example our guide provides is the canna plant. It's wonderfully chaotic and just entirely lacks any mirrored balance. And this brilliantly illustrates our core framework. Take a mental screenshot of this. We've got actinomorphic with its many planes, zygomorphic with its single plane, and the totally rule-breaking asymmetric Soraka with 0 planes. This right here is the ultimate structural foundation you really need to memorize. All right, section 3, the benefits of symmetry and why this all actually matters. So the crucial point is that symmetry isn't just about a flower looking pretty. It is a vital, totally essential tool for survival. Our blueprint outlines 3 huge benefits here. First, it completely helps us humans in the classification and identification of plant species. Second, and honestly most importantly for the plant itself, it massively aids in pollination. A specific symmetry, especially in those zygomorphic flowers, creates these perfect little landing pads that specifically attract and guide certain pollinators, like bees, right directly to the pollen. And third, these shapes showcase profound evolutionary adaptations. We're talking structural changes made over millennia just to ensure the plant's genes actually get passed on. Which brings us to section 4, test your knowledge. Time for a rapid-fire quiz to see exactly what stuck from today. Let's do this. Question 1. Which of these flowers is completely asymmetric? Is it A, the China rose, B, canna, C, datura, or D, mustard? Think back to our big rule breaker. Got your answer locked in? The answer is B, canna. Huge congratulations if you remembered our gloriously chaotic, irregular plant that flat out refuses to be divided into equal halves. Moving right along to question 2, how many planes of symmetry do you actually find in an actinomorphic flower? Is it A, none, B, 1, C, many, or D, only 1? Here's a quick hint. Think back to that pie analogy. And the correct answer is C, many, because it has that perfect radial symmetry. You can slice that pie straight through the center in any number of planes and still get those 2 equal halves. Okay, final question. Let's bring it home. An example of a zygomorphic flower is A, sunflower, B, mustard, C, pea, or D, datura. Remember now, zygomorphic means bilateral, just that one single plane, like a human face. Which of these fits? The answer is C, the pea flower. Excellent job if you nailed that one. You have officially decoded the major types of floral symmetry. To wrap up our explainer today, let's just return to this core thesis from the text. Symmetry in flowers is far, far more than just a fun geometry lesson. It's literally a window into identification and deeply ingrained evolutionary adaptations. By understanding the difference between actinomorphic, zygomorphic, and asymmetric flowers, you really unlock a whole new layer of appreciation for plant biology and how these species survive and communicate with their entire ecosystems. So, I want to leave you with this little challenge. Next time you're outside and you look at a flower, don't just see the color. Look a little closer. Can you spot its invisible plane of symmetry? Is it a pie? Is it a face? Or is it a rule breaker? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Stay curious and keep on learning.
Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We usually just look at the beautiful petals, the colors, the scent, but today we're looking way past all of that. We're uncovering the hidden structural blueprint that literally dictates how millions of plant species are classified. We're talking about the actual hidden architecture holding the whole shebang together. So, our source material for this is basically a brilliantly organized botanical cheat sheet. And what it does is break down complex plant taxonomy based on just one single, absolutely crucial structural feature, and that's the position of the ovary. Think of this document as our treasure map for today's entire journey.
Here's what we're looking at today. 1. The anatomy of the receptacle. 2. Hypogynous, the superior ovary. 3. Perigynous, the half-inferior ovary. 4. Epigynous, the inferior ovary. 5. Why ovary position matters. And finally, 6. We'll test your botanical knowledge.
All right, Section 1. Anatomy of the receptacle. Setting the stage. To really get this, we have to start with the thalamus. Now, our source defines the thalamus as the receptacle on which all floral parts are born. Basically, it's like the foundation of a house, right? Or the stage in a theater. It's that ultimate structural base where your petals, your stamens, and most importantly for us today, the ovary, where all of them sit.
And that brings us to the core concept here. It's not just about, having an ovary and having a thalamus. It's all about the geometry between them. Scientists actually use this specific spatial relationship, literally exactly where the ovary sits relative to that thalamus receptacle, to neatly organize and classify the vast, incredible diversity of plant life on Earth. It's kind of like a giant puzzle.
Moving right along to Section 2. Hypogynous, the superior ovary. Now that word hypogynous might sound a bit intense, but it simply translates to having a superior ovary. And in this specific arrangement, the ovary is seated right at the absolute highest position on the thalamus, right at the very top. When we look at how the parts compare, the ovary basically reigns supreme because it occupies that highest peak of the thalamus. All the other stuff, the petals, sepals, stamens, all those other floral parts, they literally branch out from a level clearly below it. So yeah, it is absolutely superior in its placement.
Next up, Section 3. Perigynous, the half-inferior ovary.
So a perigynous flower is kind of the structural compromise of the plant world. The source defines this as a half-inferior ovary. It doesn't sit way up at the very top, but, well, it's not buried at the bottom either. Instead, it's sitting just partially down inside the structure, while the other floral parts sort of sprout right from the rim of the thalamus. Breaking this down, the ovary sinks right into the middle, which is exactly what gives it that half-inferior status. Meanwhile, the rest of those floral parts are sprouting from the periphery or the rim. And because of this sort of cup-like arrangement, everything basically ends up sitting at almost the exact same horizontal level. Pretty neat, right?
Moving on to Section 4. Epigynous, the inferior ovary.
Okay, so in an epigynous flower, the ovary takes the inferior position. But hey, don't let the word inferior trick you into thinking it's somehow less important. In botany, inferior strictly refers to spatial placement. It just means the ovary is completely submerged beneath all the rest of the flower parts. Structurally speaking, the ovary here is entirely swallowed up. It's embedded right deep down into the thalamus itself. Because the thalamus actually grows up and around the ovary, it ends up enclosing it completely. And that forces all those other floral parts, like the petals and stamens, to grow out from a position strictly above the ovary. All right, Section 5. Why ovary position matters. Now, you might be wondering, why does this all matter? Well, our source lays out several key benefits, and honestly, they show that this single little trait acts like a master key for scientists. Understanding the ovary position unlocks a super fundamental understanding of flower structure. It's incredibly useful for just everyday plant identification and classification. But beyond that, it actually helps researchers study the really intricate mechanics of pollination and fertilization. And amazingly, it even aids in massive evolutionary studies, letting us track exactly how different plant families adapted over millions of years. Our source explicitly emphasizes this with a great core takeaway. Classifying these three types, hypogynous, perigynous, and epigynous, is literally the backbone of organizing the natural world. You see, taxonomy relies so heavily on these consistent structural traits. Let's wrap things up with Section 6. Test your botanical knowledge. All right, question 1. Think back to our foundation. What was the name of that stage where all these floral parts sit? Is the receptacle also known as A, the ovary, B, the thalamus, C, the stamen, or D, the style? If you guess B, you hit the nail on the head. It's the thalamus. That is the crucial structural base we talked about right at the very beginning. Okay, moving right along to question 2. Remember our little spatial journey downwards? Which term describes the flower where the ovary is entirely swallowed up and embedded? Is it A, hypogynous, B, perigynous, C, epigynous, or D, none of these? Spot on. The answer is C, epigynous. The epigynous flower features that totally embedded inferior ovary position, which of course means all those petals are forced to grow from above it. And here's our final question, zooming way out to the big picture we were just discussing. What is the actual core benefit of mapping out these ovary positions? Does it primarily help in A, photosynthesis, B, respiration, C, the classification of flowers, or D, transpiration? The answer to that last one is C, classification. And honestly, that perfectly brings us to our final thought for today. Just by identifying where that tiny ovary sits on the thalamus, we can classify and basically decode a flower's entire evolutionary history. So, the next time you look at a simple flower, are you just going to see its beautiful petals? Or are you going to look a little deeper to find those structural secrets embedded inside? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep staying curious. Welcome everyone to This Explainer. I am so thrilled you're tuning in. Today we're going to demystify the complex botanical terminology behind the plants and veggies we literally see and eat every single day. Have you ever looked at a tomato and wondered about those little green leaves stuck to the top? Or why some flowers drop all their parts while others totally cling onto them as they turn into fruit?
Well, botany has this incredibly elegant, structured language to describe exactly that. In this explainer, we're decoding the blueprint of blooms. We'll translate those intimidating, multisyllabic Latin terms into simple visual concepts that you can actually take with you straight to the grocery store or out into the garden. Let's get into it. Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. 1. Meet calyx and corolla. 2. Fused or free sepals. 3. The power of persistence. 4. Real-world plant families. And 5. Test your botany knowledge.
Section 1. Meet calyx and corolla. Let's start with the outer layers. So, let's do an anatomical zoom in. First up, our main character, the calyx. Botanists use the shorthand letter K for this. It's the absolutely outermost whorl of the flower, basically a collection of what we call sepals. These are usually green, leaf-like structures packed with chlorophyll. And their main job? Protection. They act like a tough little shield for the flower when it's just a vulnerable bud. Plus, the calyx is usually persistent, meaning it tends to stick around. Now, contrast that with the corolla, which gets the shorthand C. This is the next inner whorl, essentially the collection of petals. Unlike that protective calyx, the corolla is all about putting on a show. These petals are brightly colored, heavily scented, and super attractive, because their entire purpose in life is to flag down passing pollinators. And unlike the calyx, the corolla is generally not persistent. Once the flower gets pollinated, those beautiful petals, they usually just drop right off.
Section 2. Fused or free sepals. Let's see how these pieces connect.
The first condition you've got to know is called polypetalous. Don't let the long word intimidate you. In this specific setup, the sepals making up that outer calyx layer are completely free and individual from one another. If you were to gently pull on one, it would pop off by itself without dragging the rest along. So your keyword to remember here is free. On the flip side, we've got gomosepalous. This is the condition where those sepals making up the calyx are actually fused together. They form the single, unified cup or tube right at the base of the flower. You literally couldn't pull just one off without tearing the whole structure apart. So, for gomosepalous, lock in the keyword fused.
Now what's really interesting is how this looks in the real world. Take your everyday, standard tomato. If you look at the top green part, yep, that's the calyx, you can clearly see those individual star-like points. Those are free sepals, perfectly demonstrating the polypetalous condition. Now think about a pea pod. Look closely at the base where it connects to the stem. See how that green tissue forms a continuous little fused cup holding the pod? That right there is a textbook example of gomosepalous. It is so cool how these abstract scientific terms suddenly make perfect sense when you anchor them to the produce section. Section 3. The power of persistence. What stays and what falls.
So the crucial point is figuring out the calyx's life cycle, like what happens after the flower actually blooms. Botanists quickly map this out using some really simple formulas. When you see the formula Ks, it means the sepals are persistent. The K stands for calyx, right? So this means those green leaf-like structures stubbornly stay attached to the fruit long after the flashy petals have dropped. We literally just saw this with both the tomato and the pea. But if you see the formula Kc, that tells you the sepals are not persistent. They do their job protecting the bud, sure, but once the flower opens and gets pollinated, they fall right off alongside the petals. Botanists use these simple shorthand codes, KS and KC, to quickly categorize thousands and thousands of plants. But, nature always has a few incredible exceptions. Take a look at this modified fluffy calyx. In the Asteraceae family, which includes things like sunflowers, the calyx doesn't just sit there acting like a basic green leaf. It dramatically alters its shape and texture into what botanists call a pappus. It gets all hairy, light, and fluffy. And why? Because instead of just protecting a bud, this modified calyx acts like a tiny parachute, catching the wind to help disperse the plant's seeds far and wide. It's a brilliant evolutionary adaptation of the exact same structure we saw in the tomato.
Section 4, Real-World Plant Families. Let's classify our food. Notice how we're categorizing these massive plant families based entirely on the simple rules we just learned. First up, the families with free and persistent sepals, that KS rule. We have the Solanaceae family, the nightshades. This includes the potato, the brinjal or eggplant, and our classic tomato, which features fleshy sepals firmly attached to the fruit. We've also got the Cucurbitaceae family, your cucumbers, pumpkins, and bitter gourds. Oh, and the Brassicaceae family, which gives us mustard. In all of these, the sepals are totally free from each other, but they stubbornly stick around on the fruit. Then, let's look at families with fused and persistent sepals. The Leguminosae family brings us peas and beans, and the Malvaceae family gives us beautiful ornamentals like the China rose. For these guys, the sepals form a fused cup, and that cup stays right there on the plant as it develops. Literally, once you know the code, you can read the genetic map of your entire vegetable garden.
Section 5. Test your botany knowledge. It's pop quiz time. We've covered a lot of ground today, so here's your first question. Think back to the very beginning. The outermost whorl of a flower is A, the corolla, B, the calyx, C, the androecium, or D, the gynoecium. Lock in your answer.
And the correct answer is B, calyx. Huge congratulations if you remember that the calyx is that absolutely crucial green outermost protective layer shielding the bud before it blooms. Great job. Let's move to the next one and see how this builds. This one's slightly harder. Remember our fluffy seed disperser? Pappus is a modified hairy calyx found in which plant family? Is it A, Solanaceae, B, Asteraceae, C, Fabaceae, or D, Malvaceae? Take a second. Try to recall that parachute-like visual. And the answer is B, Asteraceae. Remember the visual of those fluffy sunflower seeds catching the wind? That modified hairy calyx is the absolute signature of the Asteraceae family. Before we wrap up, I want to highlight exactly why all of this matters. Like, why do we actually care if a tiny leaf on a tomato is fused or free? Well, these structural details are foundational to science and society. For plant identification, it allows botanists out in the field to quickly classify completely unknown plants just by checking these really simple rules. In terms of taxonomy and systematics, it helps us create a highly organized map of the entire natural world. It also reveals profound evolutionary relationships, showing us exactly how different plant families are genetically linked through millions of years of adaptation. And practically speaking, for agricultural practices,
Understanding these structures aids farmers in managing proper pollination and optimizing how seeds and fruits form. That directly impacts our global food supply. So I want to leave you with this final thought. The next time you're in your kitchen slicing into a fresh tomato or shelling a pod of peas, will you take a split second to spot the persistent calyx left behind? Will you actually notice if it's free or fused? Botany isn't just trapped in textbooks. It's sitting right there on your cutting board. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep observing, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.